Good morning. It's Wednesday, October 8th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 733 days old. I'm your host, Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief on year 2 and 1 day of this war. Well, we all know that yesterday was an important day. We marked that 2 years of the war that turned the Middle East upside down. But today is another important milestone. It marks 2 years since the Israelis vowed to never again allow for its enemies to build up their capabilities in plain sight or to attack Israel and get away with it. That means no more Hamas rockets without an overwhelming response. No more Hezbollah aggression without a reprisal that is twice as strong. None of that slow boil scenario that allowed Israel's enemies, notably Iran, to slowly but surely draw within striking distance with those proxies. The October 8th mentality is a serious thing. Just ask any Israeli. There is no going back to the October 7th way of thinking. Let's see if they keep their word. Today's guest is Yossi Klein Halevi, the New York Times bestselling author of Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, who is currently a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Yossi has been deeply attuned to the complexities of the post-October 7th reality for Israelis and Gazans alike. He'll be joining us shortly to reflect on how the war has reshaped Israeli society, influenced Israel's global standing, and much more. So stay tuned. I'm watching the reports out of Cairo right now, and I must admit, I'm pulled in two directions. First, my concerns. Right now, the Israelis are negotiating yet again for the release of its hostages. And yet again, Hamas is trying to move the goalposts. What was supposed to be a hard Sunday deadline for Hamas to agree to the Trump 20-point plan has somehow slipped to Wednesday. To make matters worse, Hamas may be finding support from not one, but two of its longtime patrons. I'm talking here about Qatar and Turkey, of course. If past is prologue, they are trying to cut the best deal for their terrorist clients. And I cringe to think that Donald Trump is so desperate for a win that he's granted these two state sponsors of terrorism a seat at the table. But now for the other side of the coin. What if Trump finally has leverage on these two terror sponsors? The Qataris want security from guarantees from the United States after that Israeli strike. The Turks want the United States to drop its hold on certain weapon sales. If he plays his cards right, Donald Trump can use all of this as leverage to demand that Qatar and Turkey force Hamas to accept a deal. If the Qataris have the juice, that is. You know, I'm a professional pessimist, but I also have a little bit of hope here, because it still looks like the best chance we've had for an end of conflict right now since the war erupted. Which way will it go? We'll soon find out. Now for your headlines. Headline 1, a prisoner exchange deal between Iran and France is in the works. Okay, it's more like a hostage diplomacy deal. Iran has been holding a French couple since 2022 and a teenage cyclist since June. The teenager was arrested 3 days into the 12-day war, and that was as he was biking through Iran on a transcontinental trip. Iranian authorities acquitted him yesterday. That's the good news. As for the couple, France believes that they're arbitrarily jailed in Tehran's notorious Evin prison and that they've been subject to conditions that are akin to torture. They've also been deprived of consular protection, which is really troubling. France actually brought their case before the International Court of Justice, accusing Iran of violating consular protection rights, but then dropped the case last month, curiously. Turns out Iran wants France to release an Iranian woman who was arrested in February. She's accused of promoting terrorism on social media. Yet another example of how Iran detains Westerners only to use them later as bargaining chips. Headline 2, some interesting stuff coming out of Lebanon and Syria both. First, let's go to Lebanon. The IDF eliminated a Hezbollah air defense commander. According to the IDF, this guy was trying to rehabilitate Hezbollah's battered air defenses, and he was working with the relevant procurement folks in Iran. Now to Syria, Israeli forces thwarted an attempt to smuggle weapons into Israel. Troops spotted two suspects attempting to traffic 5 pistols across the Syrian border. We're not talking about a huge amount of weaponry here, but it's still worth noting that a smuggling route and a network was activated. The Israelis nabbed these guys, seized their weapons, and then transferred the guns to security forces. Headline 3, speaking of Syria, Syria and Kurdish Forces in the country agreed to a ceasefire yesterday. The ceasefire went into effect immediately. The Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF as they're called, is a U.S. backed Kurdish force that's been clashing with Syrian forces over there in northern and northeastern Syria. The Kurds want greater autonomy. They have for a long time, and Syria's new rulers want them integrated into the Syrian state. Fat chance and not much of a recipe for stability. In March, the two sides reached a deal to integrate the Kurds into Syria's civil and military institutions. But implementing the deal has proven complicated. Yesterday, Syrian's defense minister met with the head of the SDF and hashed out the details of a comprehensive ceasefire. Huzzah, I guess. Let's see how long this thing lasts. I'm not holding my breath, but you know what? It would be good to see less tumult on Israel's northeastern border. And headline 4, briefly, the Houthis are still Houthing. They keep firing missiles at southern Israel. It's dangerous. The Israelis are taking precautions. Apparently, authorities installed at least 10 new bomb shelters on beaches and in other public spaces across Eilat after a Houthi drone evaded air defenses and injured 20 people last month. Eilat did not take a lot of a beating during the war, but it is now. And I guess at this point, the good news is folks can continue to snorkel and dive in Eilat. So good thing there, I guess. All right, it's time for my interview now with New York Times bestselling author Yossi Klein Halevi. Let's dive right in. Welcome to the program, Yossi Klein Halevi.
Great to be with you, John.
All right. I often think of you as someone who has his finger on the pulse of the Israeli psyche, if I can mix metaphors. So how is Israel holding up after 2 years and 1 day of the war?
Excuse me. The truth is that I don't think we really know how to answer that question. I certainly don't. I'm not even sure I know how to answer that question for myself. You know, there are days when I think I'm okay, we're okay, and there are other times, and that was certainly the experience yesterday, the second anniversary, when I felt that I couldn't breathe. Physically, I actually felt I had to remind myself to breathe. I think that's partly a result of this deep identification that so many of us feel with the hostages, and that's visceral. You know, I near the there's a nursing home near where I live in Jerusalem, and there's a big banner on the facade with the pictures of the elderly hostages. This goes back a year before they were released, and it says everyone's grandparents. And every time I would see that, it would be like a kick in the gut, because it was true. It wasn't a metaphor. And so long as the hostages are still in the tunnels, for them it's October 7th. And so we as a society have been stuck in October 7th. So that's one part of the question. The other part is we've come so far from where we were on October 8th in terms of reclaiming our military credibility, our deterrence. And for me, that was the overriding goal of the war. And once we managed to reclaim our deterrence, I began to feel, and I think many others did too, that Gaza was a sideshow, and that this war, which is really the Iranian-Israeli war, won't be determined in Gaza, but in Iran itself. And so that also has created a kind of a shift in the mood here. It's allowed us to some extent to own the war and its consequences, and feel like we're back in control of events. So it's a mix. I can't answer the question in any one categorical way.
Well, and in so doing, you've answered it in a perfectly classical Yossi Klein Halevi kind of way, and that's why we have you on. So thank you. I suppose I need to also ask this. By the way, I mean, I fully agree that this is the Israeli-Iranian war, and I mean, I've been calling this the October 7th wars, because it's been a series of them. Most of them appear to have been settled. You've got the Houthis and the Iranians still lingering out there. Gaza, hopefully we find settled soon. But
well, you're the guys, John, you're the guys who have framed this war from the beginning. In fact, even before the war actually began, you framed this war.
I wish we didn't have to, but we could all see it. And I know you could too. Now I think we're just trying to deal with the fallout. And to that end, I mean, let me ask, the changes that Israel has undergone, people talk about these changes all the time, but not all the changes are significant. Not all the changes are here to stay. But what do you think has changed Israel permanently? You live there. I've visited quite a bit. I see some real permanent shifts that have taken place. Do you see any? Do you feel like it's a different place?
Yeah, absolutely. Israel, in some ways, has reverted back to the 1950s and 60s, when the existence of the country was not taken for granted by Israelis themselves, when we were still living under the shadow of existential threat. Now, I think that we've been under existential threat to some extent all along, certainly since the Iranian Revolution and the Iranian nuclear program, but that didn't impact directly on the Israeli psyche. That was more the concern of the policymakers. What changed on October 7th was the return of the existential state of mind in Israel. October 7th was a kind of a pre-enactment of what the destruction of Israel would look like. The border is overrun. The army is in complete disarray, to say nothing of the government. And citizens are just left to fend on their own. So and that shock is going to be with us for at least a generation.
Yeah.
And so,
and I have to say, when you talk about that shock, it's the shock of, an entire people that this country that you live in is forged on trauma. And now you've got that more trauma. And this is the thing that's going to define this generation, isn't it?
Very much so. And even some of the language which had disappeared from Israeli discourse came back after October 7th. For example, Ein brera, we have no choice, or we're destined to live by the sword. These are expressions that post 1973 Israel, certainly post Sadat Begin Israel, began to withdraw from. Or even the emergence of the slogan Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel lives, which was never a popular slogan in Israel because, of course the people of Israel lives. That's the whole point of the state. I don't need to proclaim it. I don't need to sing it. That was much more of a diaspora slogan. After October 7th, that's now part of the Israeli lexicon, and frankly, it depresses me.
By the way, it's part of the lexicon in the diaspora. We hear it all the time. We never heard it. It's not something that I would ever see anybody post on social media, or how they would sign an email. But that's where we are. That's the kind of,
not since the days of the Soviet Jewry movement, which was what popularized the slogan.
Certainly not in 2025.
Yeah.
What about the Israeli left? We don't hear anything these days about two-state solutions. Is this something that's lost and gone forever? And if it is, what does it mean for Labor and Meretz and Shalom Achshav and all the other parties and organizations that spent decades fighting for peace? Is this just not going to be a discussion now for another generation?
I don't think so. Let me reframe that. I think it depends on the fate of the Abraham Accords. That if the Accords are expanded, if the Saudis enter the dynamic, then I think we're going to see a revival of the Palestinian question on the Israeli agenda, not necessarily, actually, I don't think at all, in the form that we're used to of of a completely sovereign Palestinian state, and we'll negotiate these very firm borders. I don't think it's going to be that, at least not for the foreseeable future. But my hope is, as someone who supports some kind of, I'll speak very cautiously, some kind of easing of the Palestinian tragedy, that we begin shifting the movement away from annexation and a binational state towards some alternative. And we can only do that in the context of regional partners. And, there are two takeaways from October 7th, and there are opposite takeaways. The first is there is no way that we can possibly risk duplicating another Gaza in the West Bank. And so the thought of withdrawal from the West Bank is inconceivable. But the second takeaway is October 7th proves beyond doubt that these two peoples cannot live together in one political entity. And Ariel Sharon was right to pull us out of Gaza. And so that second takeaway has been muted, but it hasn't disappeared. I think I think that on some level, many Israelis understand that October 7th was not just a confirmation of the right-wing position, but also a confirmation of the other position. And that, of course, is such an Israeli dilemma because, you're right, yeah.
Yeah, and really quite a Yossi Klein Halevi observation. Last question before I let you go. You've been incredibly generous with your time, and I thank you. I want to ask you about Israel's isolation. I mean, how bad do you think it is right now? I mean, I happen to think that Israel's seen it all before. They've been through it all before. The Arab boycott, the Zionism is racism stunt at the UN, Sabra and Shatila in Lebanon, the first intifada, the second intifada. I mean, BDS, we've been watching all of this over the years, and it's all isolated Israel, and yet the Israelis have battled back time and again. Am I being overly simplistic and overly optimistic here, or do you think that something is different right now as we watch the impact of the October 7th wars on Israel?
So I ask myself that question all the time, and my frame of reference is as you mentioned, the immediate post-Yom Kippur War period. Zionism, racism, Arafat coming to the UN, the Arab oil boycott. And we were pariahs diplomatically, in some ways much worse than we are today. There were many more countries after the Yom Kippur War that recognized the PLO than recognized Israel. And so that's not our situation today. But what's worse now than before is that the delegitimization is filtering down into the grassroots, into this kind of amorphous cultural place where Israel now has a bad odor. The name Israel, to say nothing of Zionism. And when the Zionism racism resolution was passed in 1975, there was tremendous pushback within, for example, the mainline churches in America. Inconceivable today. Universities. I went to journalism school shortly after the Zionism racism resolution, and the consensus among my classmates was that, of course, we stand with Israel. This was a liberal university, and so that's so much worse. But there's another analogy which I think is more hopeful with the post Yom Kippur era, which is we didn't know it, of course, in 1973, but in 1977 we realized retroactively that the war had opened the door to Israel's first peace agreement with an Arab country, and this war may well do the same. And if it brings in the Saudis, and that, of course, if the Saudis join the peace process, it's basically the end of the Sunni war against Israel, which was for 75 years the Arab-Israeli conflict. And so that's an extraordinary and tantalizing possibility. And here's one last surreal thought for you, John, which is we could find ourselves in a situation where Israel is increasingly delegitimized in the West and increasingly finds its place in the Middle East. And what we do with that, how American Jews navigate that, how we navigate that, what that means for Israel, what it means for the Jewish people, as we say in the Middle East, God is great.
Allahu Akbar. All right.
Well, it works in both languages.
That's right. That's right. All right. We're going to leave it there. That is a fascinating thing to think about. And I guess everybody at home listening, start learning Arabic. Thank you, Yossi Klein Halevi, for joining us today on the FDD Morning Brief.
Thanks, John. Pleasure.
All right. That was always impactful. That guy's terrific. Here's what FDD has on tap for you today. In testimony before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Subcommittee on East Asia, the Pacific, and International Cybersecurity Policy, man, that's a mouthful, FDD's Craig Singleton explained China's not-so-secret weapon against Taiwan, patience. Instead of a full-scale invasion, Beijing is slowly choking Taiwan using tactics like cyber probes and energy blackmail. Taiwan buys nearly all of its fuel from overseas and almost has nothing in reserve. One squeeze and the lights could flicker, which means Congress needs to act fast. Scary stuff. FDD's Josh Birnbaum reveals in the New York Post that America has accidentally become the world's best money laundering hub. That's awkward. According to Josh, anonymous shell companies allow Mexican cartels, Chinese gangs, and corrupt dictators to hide the billions of dollars in this country with no questions asked. But Josh offers a fix. Ban anonymous companies, make financial professionals verify where money comes from, and punish secrecy havens. I'm looking at you, Delaware. Well, when you put it that way, Josh, duh. But seriously, Delaware. Finally, my colleague Natalie Icano published a letter in the Wall Street Journal warning not to put the cart before the horse when it comes to Qatar's apparent shift on Hamas. As discussed, it's good news that Qatar backed President Trump's plan for Gaza, but Natalie warns that Doha's next move will be indicative. Will Qatar sustain the pressure on its Hamas clients or back any new demands that the terrorists put on the table? Big question, big answers coming soon. And scene. Show's over. Go home. Go to work. Go outside for a walk, but you can't stay here. Actually, don't go anywhere yet, not before I tell you this. If you're craving more brainy content, check out the expert analysis on our website, fdd.org. Read our quick takes on X or watch the videos we post on Instagram and YouTube. They're really good and they're fun sometimes when it's not too depressing. And yes, you can still make the generous tax-deductible donation that you've been thinking about all year. Actually, you've been thinking about it since October 7th of 2023. You can do that at fdd.org/invest. Tune in Friday for another episode of the FDD Morning Brief. Until then, I'm Jonathan Schanzer, signing off for FDD.